Okay, so you should be finished with all the pre-work, all the practice work to do the final artwork. With your final artwork, you're doing it on the biggest paper of the watercolor paper. It's the heavy stock paper. Remember, it was clipped with, and we've used up two of these strips for the practice with the oil pastels and the three different watercolor washes. We used the second larger size to practice oil pastel of a pumpkin, and then the watercolor washes into the pumpkin and the negative space. So now we're using the third and the largest piece of paper. It's 18 inches this way and 12 inches this way. Please make sure it's the watercolor paper and it's that big size, all right? So this is just my extra stuff. You should have already used up two. If you had four of them, you might have two of these strips left, and you can practice some more if you want. And this should already be used, right? So you should only have this and maybe two more strips of the tall, skinny one. I've already taken my paper, my bigger paper, and I've measured out a 1-inch border around the edges of that paper. You might not be able to see it in the video here, but I've used my ruler and a pencil. Please make sure you use a pencil and not oil pastel, and measured a 1-inch border right here, 1-inch border all the way around the outer edges of the paper. So the inside is smaller, obviously, than the size of the paper by 1 inch all the way around. So I've got it set up horizontally. We're doing it horizontally so that we can set two pumpkins into the picture. Before you do this work, please read the effective composition handout on the assignment at Canvas. Please make sure you understand it. Also, I want you to understand the difference between just putting stuff on the paper and thinking it's pretty to having a balanced composition. So I'm going to explain that a little bit. If you can imagine another line drawn vertically in the paper that divides the paper into two halves like this, one half and one half, we're going to try to occupy the left-hand side in about the same amount of occupied area as we do on the right-hand side of that imaginary line. If it's harder for you to understand it with the objects, then think about the negative space that's not occupied. Okay, so we're going to draw two pumpkins into the picture. You can use one or more colors and use the color or colors that are symbolic or expressive. Please don't do colors that are on the actual pumpkins like oranges and greens that are representational. You're going for colors that are more expressive, that have a meaning. So you're using expressive colors or symbolic colors, even with the pastel lines, all right? So when you're roughing it in, remember I want you to use the underlying shapes technique. But you want to kind of think about a pumpkin, what its basic shape is. So at Canvas, in the discussions, I have photos of all the pumpkins I have in my home classroom for you to look at for inspiration, or you can just look at pumpkins that you might have around or that you find online. We're not drawing them exactly as they are. We're getting the essence of them. And different pumpkins look differently. Like this one is longer from side to side than it is tall, whereas this one is a little bit like that, but it's almost the same height as it is the width if you take into consideration its stem. So you want to think about how it fits in there, but you're not drawing it exactly like it looks. You're just getting the essence of it so that you can do an expressive pumpkin rather than a realistic pumpkin. All right? So I'm going to put, the second consideration is, besides balanced composition, is you want to have one pumpkin a little lower in the picture and the other one a little higher to start creating the sense of space and depth. The closer things are, the lower they look on the ground, and the farther away things are, the higher they are on the ground, okay? It's a visual thing. We know they're really all both sitting on the ground, but the farther they are, the closer they get to the horizon line, and the higher they are in relationship to our eye level, all right? So we're going to put one down low and one up high, all right? I'm going to do one really close here, and remember, you're just using the underlying shapes to rough it in, so keep it really light so that you can disguise them if you when you're done. So you're just roughing it in, and this one's going to be kind of low. There's where I want my pumpkin to be, starting there, ending there for the pumpkin's body. I'm going to stop right about here for the stem of the pumpkin, and I'm just going to rough in that pumpkin stem too. You might not be able to see those lines, but that's the idea. You don't want it to be so dark that you can't disguise them when you start with the actual contours. I moved the camera a little closer so you might be able to see them a little bit better. So I've roughed it in really lightly. My second pumpkin, here's the bottom of my first pumpkin. My second pumpkin, I'm going to lift it up a little bit higher, so about twice the distance from the border at the bottom as this one is, so a little bit higher. Helps to make it look like it's farther away. And I'm going to overlap the second pumpkin with the first pumpkin, and overlap is another way that we show that something is closer to us than another thing. By cutting off our view of one part from another part, it helps to exaggerate or extend the idea that one thing is closer to you. So one lower, one higher. The closer one overlaps the farther away one. All right? So this one, I'm going to start at the edge of the first pumpkin, roughing it in, and I'm going to not go all the way to the border. Remember your rules of composition. And I'm going to make it come up a little bit higher than I initially roughed in there for balance, right? I don't want to make a tiny one here and a big one here, but then it's equally unbalanced. One side heavier than the other makes it feel awkward. So the stem on this one, I'm going to put starting right here, and I'm just roughing it in, right? So now I've got them blocked in place. I didn't go quite to the edges or to the borders. This one is higher than that one, and it's also overlapped by that one. That helps us to see space and depth. Next step, using the same or different colors, I'm going to put in the contour lines of the pumpkin. I'm going to use this one as an example. The contours that separate each of these sections, these lines that go up and down here, that create this section, this section, this section, they curve with the contours of the pumpkin. As they get toward the middle, they go almost straight up and down, but they curve outward. They radiate from the center outward and then come back in to the bottom again. So it's a curve from the center line, it curves to the left outward, and from the right outward. Okay, so you want to make that happen, and in this case they're pretty big sections. On this one you can just barely see them, right? So that's where you use different line qualities. Thick and thin, dark and light, rough and smooth can help you to express whether they're really heavy and deeply shadowed, or curving away from the light source and heavier, or if they're shallow. All right, so I'm going to make this one have bigger ones and this one have smaller scallops or ridges. So I'm starting at almost the center, and I'm going to come outward and then downward to the bottom. Now it's all about the same line, so why not all of a sudden come back in and go from thicker to darker, and thicker and darker to thinner and lighter, and then thicker again. So that change in darkness and lightness helps to express the curvature, and it's more expressive on top of it. On this side, those lines curve this way toward that outer edge. And they have a little more weight at the bottom than at the middle, and then a little more at the top because they're curving in and getting less light, in my case. All right? Outer edge. Remember, it doesn't matter if you follow the original blocked in or roughed in lines. That was just to help set up about the right size, in about the right place, and around the right arrangement. Okay? On this side, same thing. Thicker and thinner, darker and lighter. All right, that's the back edge. Maybe a little bit too much scalloping there, so I added a little bit more in there. So thicker and lighter in the center, getting lighter at the top in the middle. I mean, getting lighter, getting thicker and thinner. All right, so I'm just going to come in and make them a little bit more enhanced in some places. That's a little awkward. Sorry about that. So a little heavy right there. Not what I intended to do. And then some of them have more on the sections themselves. Like there's a deep one here, but a shallower one here. So why not add a few more into it? And they don't go all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom. Maybe they're just in the middle. Maybe there's a little dent. All right, so that gives those things give them character. Let's talk about the stem. The stem curves right in the middle, and then they are cylindrical, and they are cut off at the top. So a little bit of that. Just look at the stems on the pumpkins and be inspired by them. And there are some lines between the outer edges of the left and the right. Those are from expanding and shrinking because they're organic, and as they dry out, they get deep crevices because of that. So put a few of those in there too. That's your first pumpkin. It's lower, it's bigger, and it's overlapping our second pumpkin. Same process. I'm going to switch to a second color here, and that'll help to make that expressive project a little bit more expressive. So I'm switching over to orange. No, I'm going to go to blue. I don't see too many blue pumpkins. I see a few, but not too many. So same thing. I'm going to make these shallower than that first pumpkin, as I said. So I'm not making them as deep and dark, and they're meeting up a little bit more in a line with each other, right? They don't bump and bump and bump. So at the top, curves, and they stop at this pumpkin's edge, okay? That's a lot of contours, probably more than I wanted or needed. But if you look closer, this guy has a lot of them, okay? But it does have a lot more than I initially intended. So I'm going to make them a little thicker at the bottom just to show a little bit more weight, less light is hitting that surface. And I'm going to make some variations a little bit more within them at the bottom, and then maybe again at the top, okay? Next step is, yes, those lines, the underlying shapes, the original roughed in lines do show a little bit, but they'll give a little bit more expressiveness to the pumpkin as we're finishing it up. The next step is to do its stem. It curves a little bit like that where it meets up, and I made it a little bit wider at the top on purpose, just for some expressive purposes. Put the flat edge where it's cut off, right? It's a little bit flat right here. All right, so I've just added a little bit of that, and some of the striations, the growth, the drying out. Now you're ready for the next step. Next step is to, let's ground them. We need to use pastel lines to put some cast shadows on the ground to help show that they're sitting on the ground, not just flying in space. They're not super pumpkins. They're just pumpkins sitting on the ground. They're a little expressive, so they're maybe happy pumpkins or maybe sad, but they're not flying. Okay, we can use the same two pastels, and I recommend it for unity that you use the same two colors that you've already used. Maybe I'll use the blue on the brown and the brown on the blue. And what we're doing is horizontal lines because the ground is flat this way. We want to draw lines that go that way with the growth of the direction, the plane of the ground, rather than curving it. All right, and we don't want to do too many of them because this is a watercolor project too. So just a few lines going down to the border, but not below. Remember, the borders stay clean. Go right from the edge of the pumpkin with a few lines and a little higher than the bottom edge. See how much higher that is than just the bottom? All right. That helps to show that it's occupying that space. I could take a few more outward because he does go quite a distance to the right and to the left. Do the same thing with this pumpkin. I'm going to put in another line right there. This pumpkin is blocking light 2 on the ground. Notice it's a little shorter here. That's because it's blocking the light here, and it's almost following the shape on the ground, casting a shadow on the ground. Now we've got our pastel lines ready. We're ready to now transition from pastels to watercolor. When we watercolor, we're going to do one at a time so that the colors stay isolated on one object and don't run into another object. So that's our next video.